Well, hello again, everyone. We're going to look in the next few minutes at the height of the Roman Empire, from its beginnings at the Principate of Augustus all the way down to imperial collapse. So we'll begin with the Principate of Augustus. Now, in order to sort of bring ourselves into a context for the early empire, or what is more appropriately called the Principate, we have to think back to the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. That event, which was, remember, Caesar's dictatorship was one in a long line of dictatorships in the first century BCE that came about for a number of various reasons in terms of the expansion of the republic, the distribution of wealth, the redistribution of land, as well as the crisis of political leadership. Caesar's dictatorship was, for all intents and purposes, the last, although when his assassins were finally, when his life was avenged and his assassins were executed, there was a triumvirate that consisted of Augustus, Mark Antony, or I should say Octavian, who was Caesar's nephew, who later becomes Augustus. Mark Antony, who was one of Caesar's close associates and fellow generals, and Lepidus, who was a sort of a mediating figure. Each one of these three men formed another triumvirate. Eventually, Lepidus retires. Mark Antony rules the Eastern Roman Empire, Octavian the Western Roman Empire. They war against each other, and by 31 BCE, Octavian emerges as the sole ruler of the Republic. However, the years of civil war and the conflict between the last of the triumvirs, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus, proved that the republican form of government was flawed, at least for the time being, that one strong leader needed to take power and solve the problems of the Roman state. And so Octavian is proclaimed by the Roman Senate princeps, first among equals, or sometimes first citizen of the Roman Republic. And while still technically governing under the auspices of the Republic and the 12 Tables and the Constitution of the Roman state, we really have a military dictatorship in which Augustus wields personally civil, military, and religious power. That he can determine where roads are, what to fix bridges, to build bridges, infrastructure decisions, taxation decisions, and then also where the army must go. What military policy is going to be, how many legions there will be, how many auxiliaries, where forts are to be built, what campaigns are to go on, and so forth, as well as essentially taking charge of the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, and ensuring that the Roman divinities are appeased. And so all of these powers, when they are combined together, are what the Romans called imperium. This combination of civil, military, and religious power and authority. As a result, the combination of these, anyone who wields imperium would be called an emperor, and the state in which imperium becomes the rule of law is known as an empire. Okay? And so, therefore, during the Principate, the emperor, the princeps, becomes a major source of new law and uses the Senate largely as an advisory council, which it had effectively been not only during the days of the early kings, but also during the Republic. The Senate is now relegated to that advisory council status. The period from 31 BCE to 14 CE, the reign of Augustus as princeps, is one of remarkable prosperity in the Roman state. Remember, we've said already that Augustus ended the civil wars. He reinforces the frontiers. In other words, that the frontiers of the Roman state start to become more stable, although there is one exception on the northern frontier in and around 9 CE, in which several Roman legions were destroyed by the Germanic leader Arminius, also sometimes known as Haman, in a very sort of fateful moment. It actually halts Roman expansion in the north, and the Roman state will not really begin continuing to expand beyond that frontier of the Rhine and Danube rivers until the reign of Marcus Aurelius in and around the 160s or 70s. So it takes about another 150 or 60 years for the Roman state to really start expanding along the north again. And by that time, only modest gains can be made. But Augustus does stabilize the frontiers. He is a genuine conservative, I would argue. He reinforces the tradition of the pater familias, and as the father governs or rules his family, and the father's word is law in the family, so the emperor will rule as a father for the Roman state, so that his word is law, as opposed to the 12 tables being the law, or the resolutions of the Senate being the law. In order to consolidate his power base, Augustus makes an alliance with the equites, the equestrian class, among the plebeians, in order to short circuit the traditional ruling class of the Roman Republic, which had been the patrician classes who dominated the Senate. Here, Augustus is able to find a new power base of wealth seeking recognition. We'll actually see this theme emerge several other times throughout the course, especially when we begin to see the rise of the middle class, sort of the non-noble classes who have great access to wealth. These will be the people, for instance, in the 17th and 18th century that kings will rely on for loans, for support, and so on. But Augustus lays out this model already in the late first century BCE. As a result of this need for a new power base, these wealthy merchants now who are favored become the core of the new civil service. They support the emperor. The emperor rewards them with positions, administrative positions within the empire. Clerks running offices, running provincial administration, running some of the major government functions in the city of Rome itself, all come out of this wealthy merchant plebeian group of people, rather than from among the patricians. So they really end up serving one another's needs. The merchants now that have wealth have access to power. Augustus is able to take an end run around the old patricians and get people who are willing to go along with his agenda. Augustus' rule was so long and relatively peaceful that few Romans at the end of his reign desire to return to the chaos of the late Republic. And so the Principate, which was technically still part of the Republic, never went away. And so therefore we can say that the transition by 14 CE had been made from Republic to Empire. Here we see one of the most iconic statues of Augustus, the Augustus of Prima Porta. It was made around 20 BCE after commemorating his victories in the civil wars and against Mark Antony. It is marble. It is 80 inches high, so it is just about life-size, a little over life-size actually. Originally, the statue was painted. The breastplate was white. The images on it were painted in all sorts of different colors. The hair was quite red, as were the lips, and the kilt which he wears, the military kilt of leather. So it's actually very garish when you see it in full color. But it becomes the classic statue of a Roman emperor that will be modeled over and over and over again. We'll see Roman emperors depicted in this way. So Augustus really does become the model of an emperor par excellence. So the Roman state was, of course, an urban one, was based on towns. One could go so far as to argue that the Roman Empire really was, in fact, a vast confederation of Mediterranean city-states, the central government serving to connect it by trade. In that empire, then, the Western Empire was a source of raw materials. The provinces of Spain, Gaul, modern day France, Britannia, even the western parts of North Africa were all areas where raw materials could be acquired. They would be sold into the east to make finished goods, or into Italy to be made into finished goods. And then the east provided luxury goods that could be shipped to the west, as well as very wealthy cities that could be taxed. And therefore, and this will hold true, the Western Empire will be kind of a raw material, great ground for land for raw materials, but relatively undeveloped, while the eastern part of the empire will be the most urbanized and cosmopolitan part of the empire. The traditional centers of Western civilization in the Middle East, in Egypt, and in Greece. The home of the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the Persians and the Greeks and so forth, will continue throughout the Roman period to be kind of the most urban, advanced part of the Roman Empire. But these two halves of the Mediterranean Sea work very well together, and so therefore the Romans are able to create what historians have called the Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome, sort of melding together these two regions in cooperative harmony. Despite us calling it an urban empire, really only 20% of all Romans lived in cities, but that was pretty significant. It takes a lot of very intensive agriculture to support 20% of the population who really aren't going to be baking food, who are going to be engaged in other tasks. But nevertheless, nearly 80% of the Roman population will still live in small villages and towns scattered throughout the countryside. Few cities numbered in the hundreds of thousands, maybe 4 or 5, and only Rome itself reached 1 million, so you can sort of guesstimate the size of most towns and cities were a few thousand, maybe some in the tens of thousands. The wealthiest Romans at this time still lived in elegant villas, urban villas. Most common folks in cities lived in sort of crowded slums. However, there's a different story that happens out on the frontier towns, the towns that emerged around the forts, where the Roman army had positioned themselves. Roman soldiers would often bring their wives and family out there to the frontiers, and very naturally, towns would grow up around them. These new towns would be dominated by a new municipal aristocracy. A curia is actually the name of it, C-U-R-I-A, curia. And the curia was the sort of local governing council. And they were people with a vested interest who were probably the most wealthy businessmen. They were not as rich as, let's say, a patrician in Rome, but they wielded the same kind of power and influence in their own small way out on the frontiers. And as a result, they become the bedrock of Roman society, creating a kind of Roman microcosm, the city of Rome, writ small, out on the frontiers in all these new areas. They recreate what they know from Italy out in Gaul and Germania and Britain and North Africa and so on. And this municipal aristocracy will become increasingly important when it begins to decline, so the empire will decline. And here, of course, we have a model, an amazing reconstruction, a model of what the city of Rome would have looked like at its height. Okay, the biggest landmarks you can see, one here, the Hippodrome, where the chariot races were held, the Colosseum over here, and then you can see the very important aqueduct that runs through the city of Rome here, and a number of other landmarks that are notable, some that are still there, some that are not. Okay. Another aspect of the expansion of Rome is Romanization. Latin language and culture became the dominant cultural idiom in the Western Mediterranean. Greece and Greek still tended to dominate the East, and will after the collapse of Roman imperial authority in the West. Of course, the Latin tradition borrowed very heavily from Greece. A lot of Greek philosophers, a lot of Greek ways of learning, Greek art and architecture will be heavily influential on the Romans. But in terms of cultural domination, Latin, its idiom, its poetry, its way of thinking about the world tended to dominate the Western Mediterranean. Local native peoples adopted Roman ways. They submitted to Roman authority in order to enjoy the privileges of Roman citizenship. So they became willing participants with the Romans, and sort of the attitude being, if you can't beat them, join them. And the Romans had such a great military who was able to beat them. And so people signed up to support Rome, and therefore some local native elites indeed collaborated with the Romans in order to retain their status as local elites. So the Romans had no problem governing through a local king who still held the title of king, so long as that king was loyal to Rome. And so you could have a king in Judea, like Herod, for instance. So long as Herod was loyal to Rome, Herod could rule Israel, keep the peace, send the occasional tribute money back to Rome, and if there was a major invasion, let's say from the Persians or something like that, then the Roman army would come out. But in terms of the day-to-day operations of the province, it wasn't Rome's problem, only if a crisis broke out. And usually if a crisis was so severe of civil disorder, then the Romans would probably dismiss whoever that local ruler was in favor of another local. Okay? And as I said a moment ago, local cities, provincial cities, become microcosms of the city of Rome itself. Okay? The architecture of the city is also very, very important. Okay? Roman architecture relied heavily on the use of concrete as a building material. Right? We've quite a remarkable material itself. Things like the arch, which were pioneered by the Etruscans, became a staple of Roman engineering. They could build tall structures. They didn't need to have nearly the number of columns that we see in Greek temple architecture. We see heated pools that are associated with the bathhouses, aqueducts carrying fresh water across long distances to supply big cities like Rome and others. And of course, roads were constructed and maintained largely for use by the military. And we have a couple of images here of some of those technological innovations. Here's the bathhouse in the city of Bath in England. So this was off in the frontiers. The bathhouse is really this area that we see here in the foreground. What's in the background, as you see above here, that's part of a medieval structure. I think that's actually the Cathedral of Bath and Wells. All right, and you can see the Roman arches and so forth. And this would be communal bathing. All right, and then this is another example of the arch. The arch, if you spin it on the vertical axis, all right, if you spin an arch on a vertical axis, what do you get? You get a dome. Okay, it's an arch all the way in the round, so to speak, with a hole at the top called an oculus up here is to let light in. And this was a place in which the gods would be worshipped. It was actually commissioned by the Emperor Hadrian. It's called the Pantheon. Right? And we notice the sort of the Greek style front, but then, as I said, the arch in the back in 3 dimensions there, spun around. And you'll see here the roof. This is actually made of concrete. Okay, poured in molded concrete. The reason why there are these sort of holes, it's not just to make a pretty pattern. The reason why that ceiling is what is called a coffered ceiling is actually to lessen the weight of the dome. Okay? To have a stable dome reinforced by these kind of spines and lateral cross sections, but also to hollow out these sections in here means to make it less weighty and therefore less likely to collapse in and on itself. Okay, so those are some of the important themes that we have in the early Roman Empire. We will continue in the next lecture with a look at the 5 good emperors, the so-called 5 good emperors, followed by the crisis of the 3rd century and its revolution. So, for now. Thank you very much.